This afternoon we're going to interview Sue Brimacombe, who's from Heart Adaptations team. Today what we're doing in the webinar is we're looking at innovative practice, and we're obviously going to have a focus around kind of innovative types of adaptation. But what we want to do is capture innovative ways of working as well. So sometimes it's not just about the final adaptations. Often innovation comes through how we work. And Sue, we've got you along this afternoon because we know you've got a case that has really shown how, from an occupational therapy point of view, you've been able to work innovatively. So I've got a few questions to go through with you this afternoon. So just to kind of kick us off, can you just tell us a little bit about Heart, the team that you work with, and what your role is?
Part of my role, we are expected to carry a small caseload, a complex caseload, which I think is really useful anyway, as a practitioner, to be able to have some casework. We work with our customers right from point of referral right through to closure. So the practitioners, OTs would take on perhaps more complex cases, although our housing assessment officers have many skills really, and can actually, the more experienced housing assessment officers can work with some quite complex cases too. So
you're going to tell us a little bit about a case this afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just, before we kind of delve into how you've worked innovatively, can you just tell us a little bit about the case, the person, the situation, why they were referred through to you?
Okay, so it was a customer who had been admitted to hospital following a fall. He lives alone, independently, prior to being admitted to hospital. He had some minor health issues, but nothing that warranted hospital admission before. But like I said, he had a fall, was admitted to hospital, and developed further medical issues as a result of that fall, which meant that his mobility had been affected significantly, and had become a wheelchair user. Because he lived alone and was completely independent prior to the fall, there were a lot of services that were required to be set up in order for him to go home safely. He was medically stable after a relatively short time. However, because of services, I mean, obviously there were the issues with COVID delaying things, but notwithstanding that, there were a number of issues to address, like setting up care packages, equipment, various assessments that he needed, etc. But also, the reason that it came to Heart, the case came to Heart, was because the access to the property was complex, and West Midlands Ambulance Service felt that adaptations were required to enable him to go home on the stretcher that he would require. So that's how it came to us. And then I've been working on the case to initially get the customer home, but now I'm working on adaptations to enable him to remain home safely, and prevent further admission.
So thinking about this case, and not that, I mean, every case is individual and is different, but what is it about this case that has made it different, perhaps to kind of the usual kind of adaptations cases that you deal with?
Mm-hmm. Well, first and foremost, it needed a fast response. The team, the hospital discharge team, and the social care team, the moving on beds team, who the customer was with at the time, sort of timescales were going to be breached for getting the customer home. The customer was adamant he wanted to go home. He was really very, very keen to go home. But by the same token, he was quite resistant to accepting support because it was going to be a huge change for him. And so all the services that were being proposed, he did not have an awareness of. He wasn't aware of what social care and support involved, and what adaptations involved. So he was quite resistant. But moreover, it was more about the hospital discharge cases for heart tend to be fairly short term. So it's about getting that customer home safely. But because there was such a lack of information, or rather a range of information which was actually inaccurate, it required quite a lot of work to assess what would be needed to enable that customer to remain at home. So it was about me revisiting the criteria for our hospital discharge grants and using the range of criteria that can be used for a hospital discharge grant, so that I could not only enable that customer to go home, but also for him to stay there, because obviously that was very important to him. So I think really what was different about it was that the customer's needs weren't immediately identified as they normally would be for a hospital discharge case. It would be very straightforward. Can't get home because there are steps into the property. Okay, we'll ramp those steps. But actually, there were a whole host of other things really which required resolving with that case.
So you've helped to paint a picture about the person's situation, your involvement. Can you just, reflecting back on the case, and obviously the case is still open to you, isn't it?
It is.
So reflecting, what do you think is innovative around how you've perhaps used your skills and your knowledge, and actually yourself as well, in terms of this case?
I think because I'd like to think that I've always had a good network. I am seconded to Heart, so I've got a good network with the 5 districts and boroughs, but I'm employed by Warwickshire County Council, so I have my colleagues there. But because Heart is such a broad service, I've been able to build up what you might call a little black book, or a very good network of resources to utilise. So whereas the social worker asked about my going to assess the property, she had assessed the property and said it just needs a ramp to get home. But because she didn't have that breadth of knowledge and experience that I've had the opportunity to have with my team, I was able to understand that fire and rescue would need to do a gas safety check. We'd need a gas safety certificate for the gas fire. The customer was going to be sleeping and living 24 hours a day in the lounge with only a gas fire as heating in the property.
Yeah.
So all these things. So I was able to, if you like, inform the social care team and negotiate with them who was going to organise what. So I sort of had a central role, if you like, because I'd had the opportunity before to develop and build this wide network of support, which all needed to be involved, everyone from the neighbour, to Warwickshire Fire and Rescue. So I think it's about thinking slightly differently, particularly and I think COVID has informed us a lot about this and made us think about how we can do things in different ways.
Yeah.
So it was about, okay, we've got many different barriers here. Okay, we've got West Midlands Ambulance saying that they will be unable to take the customer because of his weight and his frame. We've got the contractor saying we're going to have to take down this wall between the customer's home and the property and the neighbours. So it was about thinking about, okay, what would the solution to, what would be the workaround for this to enable us to move things forward? Because when the case came to us, there just seemed to be a lot of factors which were preventing this customer going home. So it was stopping, it was thinking about each of those factors in turn and trying to work out with my social work colleague a way around it. Okay, so rather than saying we can't do this, it's more about saying how can we do this?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And exploring those resources that we've got at our disposal.
Yeah.
And if we can't think of a resource, finding out about it. So taking the time to find out about it. So I think COVID has taught us a lot, but I also think that going back to basics has been really useful as well. So knowing, actually going back to the criteria for the various grants that we've got and seeing how our customers fit in with those, rather than expecting our customers to fit in with what we've got available. Right. So yeah, so I think it's about adopting more flexibility. Okay, I think it's about challenging, criteria. I had discussions with my senior, with my manager about demonstrating how my customer met certain criteria, although it was initially thought that it wasn't for various reasons. And so, yeah, I think it's about just stopping and thinking and trying to find solutions rather than stopping when you meet a barrier.
So just, again, reflecting on the case, if you were to give kind of 3 or 4 kind of top tips on how to work innovatively, or what has helped you to work innovatively in terms of where you work, so what 3 or 4 kind of top tips would you give in terms to us all in terms of being able to work innovatively?
Well, as I've already referred to, having a good network. Okay, so networking with your colleagues, not just within your own team and service, but with wider teams, with social care, with non-statutory services, so that you're aware of when these are available, because obviously hospital discharge grants, we need to respond quickly. So we need to have an awareness of what's available locally anyway, and what resources are. So building up a network of both resources and keeping that up to date of what's available locally that you could potentially tap into at any given time. I'd also say about reaching out to statutory, all services really, and agencies, and just asking the question. I ran round a number of agencies, for instance, about I needed the loft clearing, and just not knowing where how that could be done. So I Googled it, loft clearances, and I did some ringing around, etc. Communication is absolutely key, particularly when there are multiple stakeholders, as there were in this case. First and foremost, engaging with that customer, and developing a working relationship with them. For instance, in this case, the customer was very resistant to any adaptations to his home. He had over many, many years maintained and upgraded his home, as he put it. And we were talking about taking down a porch that he'd put up for his mum years ago, so it's really important that we engage with the customer, because initially we had to put temporary adaptations in for this case to get him home. And then when he was home, we could then have those conversations about doing something more permanent for those long-term needs. So engaging with the customer is absolutely key. So first and foremost, just listen to what they've got to say. Communication, like I said, with, all stakeholders really, keeping everyone up to date, because again, hospital discharge grants have to be progressed quickly. We are able to respond rapidly with heart with these cases, but that means everyone has to be informed in the logistics of organising the contractor to go in, before the ambulance crew go out and risk assess, before the social worker goes and does the risk assessment for the care agency. So all these things have to be organised. So again, and that goes back to knowing what services are available. And not just that, understanding what resources you've got in your own service. So the criteria for the various grants, we offer a various grants within our service. And so it was understanding, I learned a lot from the flexibility of the grants that we can offer, and learned about demonstrating that that customer meets the criteria. So about my reasoning. So again, it's about keeping your knowledge and up to date about what you've got available in your own service, and gaining accurate information. It was absolutely key in this case, because I had so many different reports, everything from the customer's behaviour to the layout of the property. I had different reports from different agencies who'd been in. And so it was about, and how are you going to do that? So I resolved to go out and visit and have a look at myself, because I tried my absolute best, and it took a lot of work to obtain reports, risk assessments from various companies and agencies. And actually, it didn't reflect the actual situation at all, as it turned out. So I would think at a much earlier stage, if I were in this position again, I would go out myself, because I need that information to progress my work. So I would do that myself.
That's great.
But it is difficult. It was difficult for everyone. It was lockdown in COVID, and there were lots of restrictions in place. But yeah, accurate information was absolutely key in this case.
That's great, Sue. So it sounds like it was an interesting case. It's obviously still ongoing, so it'd be really interesting to see kind of long term, kind of what happens. But you've provided a really good insight in terms of how you've worked innovatively to get this gentleman home and back to where he wants to be. So huge thank you for your time this afternoon. All right, take care. Bye.
Thank you.